Glad you could be here for our second lesson today. And for this lesson, I had to break out the good old PowerPoint because to really help you to understand what we're going to talk about, it's good if you can get a visual of this. We're going to talk about an unusual topic today, one that I've never really heard preached on a whole lot, if ever, but it is a topic that's pretty hot today, and there's a lot of buzz going on about it. Today, we're going to talk about blood moons. You ever wondered what the Bible says about that? Now, this is going to be a two-part lesson. You may not realize this, but there's a lot of information on this, a lot of stuff pertaining to the blood moons. And as I was developing this lesson, I originally wanted it to be just one 30-minute lesson, but I realized pretty early on to cover this doctrine, to cover all what I need to cover, there's no way I can do it in one lesson. But what does the Bible say about blood moons? Because if you've paid attention to society, a lot of people in society are talking about it because we've had a few blood moons in the past here recently, the last year or so. We've had several of them, and people think, well, what's all this about? And doesn't the Bible say something about there being the moon turning into blood? So, what does the Bible say about that? What's going on here? Well, first off, we need to begin by asking the question, what is a blood moon? What is a blood moon, and how does a blood moon happen? How does that occur? Well, I got a diagram for you I'm going to show you here in just a second, but what you need to understand first of all is this. The phrase blood moon, that's actually a slang term. What a blood moon is technically known as is a total lunar eclipse. That is technically what a blood moon is called. Blood moon is just a slang terminology that people have given to a total lunar eclipse. Here's how it happens. Here's how a blood moon happens. You have the sun, and it may not look like the sun to you from out there in the audience. I have a hard time getting my pictures to be the right color on the screen, but that's the sun. This is planet Earth, and that's the moon. What happens is when the sun, the earth, and the moon get into an alignment like that, this is what happens. The light coming off of the sun cannot reach the moon because the earth is in the way. So the moon basically gets stuck in Earth's shadow. It's an eclipse of the moon, basically. However, some of the sun's light does reach the moon. You say, well, how does it reach the moon if the Earth's in the way? Here's how. The Earth's atmosphere will actually bend some of the sun's light around it. It will refract some of the light from the sun around that atmosphere. And as the sun's light travels through the atmosphere, the colors of the light actually split up kind of like a prism. You ever seen where you get a little triangle piece of glass and you hold it up to the light and it splits off into the different colors like a rainbow? That's kind of what the Earth's atmosphere does to the sun's light. It splits that light up into different colors. The main color that reaches the moon is, guess what? The color red. So naturally from that you get a red or a brownish tinted moon. In short, that's basically how a blood moon happens. Now, what you have to understand is that blood moons are not rare. People like to think that they're rare, but they're really not. Throughout history, there have been hundreds of blood moons. It is by no means, by no stretch of the imagination, is a blood moon some super rare occurrence. And you may not even know this, but did you know that there are usually about 2 blood moons per year? You say, no, there's not. There's not 2 blood moons per year. I don't see 2 blood moons per year. Well, here's the thing. Most people don't recognize this. When a blood moon happens, it's not something that the whole world can see. When a blood moon happens, there's only a certain portion of the world that can see it. Usually when a blood moon happens, only 1/3 of the world can see it. There's been a lot of blood moons that have occurred that we in America don't get to see. So when a blood moon occurs, it's not something that everybody in the whole wide world can see, just certain portions of the world. But on average, there's usually about 2 blood moons per year, so they're not rare. Now, one thing you have to understand is this, and this is a pretty interesting piece of information. On occasion, there will be a close succession of 4 blood moons. We'll have it where there's 4 blood moons that happen pretty close to one another, a quick succession of 4 blood moons. Now, when that happens, when there's 4 consecutive blood moons, that is referred to as a tetrad. That's the term that they use to refer to that. When you got 4 blood moons that happen really close to one another, that's known as a tetrad. Okay? Now, there have been several of those throughout history. From about 1 AD to 2000, there's been about 54 tetrads, 54 of these 4 blood moons occurring closely to one another. So again, that's not really that rare. Now, you may not realize this, but these last several blood moons that we've had, we're in the middle of a tetrad right now. The first blood moon that we had was on April 15th, 2014. We had another one on October 8th, 2014. We had one April 4th of this year, and we're scheduled to have another one the 28th of this month. So we're in the middle of a tetrad, a occurrence of 4 consecutive blood moons right now. This is known as the tetrad of 2014 and 2015. That's what NASA refers to it as. So we're in the middle of this right now. And you say, well, what's this? Why are you telling us this? What does this have to do with anything related to the Bible? Why are you telling us this? Well, here's why I'm telling you this. I'm telling you this because many see this as a sign from God that something big is about to happen. I mean, 4 blood moons happening right there in a row. I mean, I think that could be a sign from God. And most people say that, specifically it's a sign that something is going to happen in the nation of Israel. God's going to do something in Israel, and that's going to signal the return of Jesus. These blood moons mean that something is fixing to happen to the nation of Israel, and whatever is going to happen to them is going to mark the fact that Jesus is fixing to return. Okay? And there's a lot of hype about this. I mean, there's a lot of websites. As I researched this, tons of websites dedicated to this idea. There's websites like redmoonrapture.com, websites like bloodmoonprophecy.com, rapturewatch.net, endtime.com. All these websites are talking about these 4 blood moons, and they're signaling that Jesus is fixing to do something in Israel, Jesus is fixing to return, yada, yada, yada. So it's a lot of hype about it. And like I've said, I've heard a lot of people in the community here in Middleton talk about this idea. So it's a hot topic. Well, why do they see these 4 blood moons that we're having? Why do they see this as marking something to do with the return of Jesus? Why? I mean, if we've had several blood moons before, blood moons are not really a rare occurrence, why pick these blood moons out right here and say, well, these particular blood moons are going to mark the return of Jesus? Why pick these out? I mean, we've had several blood moons. Why pick these out? Well, I'm going to show you some reasons why they do. Number one, first thing that they do is they will cite that there are numerous scriptures that mention the moon being turned to blood before the day of the Lord. Here is a list of a lot of the scriptures that they will use. Joel 2, 29-31, Matthew 24, 29-30, Acts 2, 19-20, and Revelation 6, 19. Now today we're not going to get into those texts. We just don't have enough time. But next week, for the lesson we're going to do, a follow-up lesson, we're going to get into these verses. We're going to break these verses down and understand what are these verses, what are they talking about when they mention a moon or the moon turning to blood. But first thing they do is they'll cite that. The Bible says, the moon's going to be turned to blood before the day of the Lord comes. And then number two, here's what else they'll do. Here's what else they'll do. They'll say, these 4 blood moons that we're having here, 2014, 2015, they'll say, did you know that these blood moons, each of these blood moons lands on a Jewish feast day? Did you know that? Like, for instance, this one right here in April 15th. Each of these land on a Jewish feast day. Did you know that one landed on Passover? This one right here, October 8th, 2014, that one landed on the Feast of Tabernacles. The blood moon we had back in April, that landed on Passover. And this one we're scheduled to have in September 28th of this month, that one's going to land on the Feast of Tabernacles. How about that? I think God's sending a message, don't you? I mean, you're going to say that's a coincidence? I don't think so. God's sending a message. These blood moons happen to land just precisely on those Jewish feast days. God's sending a message to the nation of Israel, and that message has to do with the return of Jesus. Well, here's what else they'll do, though. You say, well, that could just be a coincidence. They try to prove to you this is not a coincidence, that something is going to happen to Israel. Here's how they do it. They'll show you that, according to history, there have been other tetrads, 4 consecutive blood moons, that have landed on Jewish feast days in the past. And every time that's happened, something big happened to the Jews. For instance, in the years 1493 and 1494, there was a tetrad of 4 blood moons, and each of those 4 blood moons landed on a Jewish feast day. There was another tetrad of 4 blood moons in 1949 and 1950, and again, each of those 4 moons landed on a Jewish feast day. Then there was another one in 1967 and 1968. Again, each moon landed on a Jewish feast day. They say, well, in each of those tetrads, some great event happened to the Jews every time. Like, for instance, right here in 1493, 1494, this series of blood moons, they'll tell you, well, in Spain, during that time, the rulers of Spain issued a decree telling all of the Jews in Spain, either you convert to Catholicism or you're going to get killed or kicked out of here. See? God was marking that. God was letting the Jews know by these 4 blood moons, hey, something's fixing to happen. And then right here in 1949 and 1950, these 4 blood moons landing on Jewish feast days, something happened to the Jews here too. Israel gained its independence that year, around this time. The nation of Israel was under oppression, but they broke the bonds of oppression and they became their own independent state. And then in 1967 and 68, around that time, the nation of Israel gained back Jerusalem as a part of their territory. They fought in this 6-day war and they gained back Israel. So God was marking each of these events by these blood moons. And so here's what they'll say. They say, now think about it. Okay, this tetrad right here landed on 4 Jewish feast days. Something happened to the Jews. This one right here, something happened to the Jews. This one right here, something happened to the Jews. Well, look at this. There's one coming up in 2014, 2015. What do you think's going to happen? Something's going to happen to them Jews. They'll say, follow the train here. I mean, just follow the logic here. It's bound to happen. It did in the past. Every time in the past, these 4 blood moons land on Jewish feast days, something happened to them Jews. We in the middle of one right now, so something fixing to happen to them Jews. Makes sense, don't it? You look at it, you think, well, that's pretty good thinking. That makes sense. Well, what's going to happen to the Jews? Well, like I told you, specifically, they believe it's going to be something that could or will be an event that has to do with the return of Jesus. That's basically what they're getting at. Now, let me show you this. I wondered this. I thought, who came up with this idea? You ever wondered that? Who came up with all this? You know, most people believe in this blood moon stuff, but they don't even stop to think who invented the doctrine. They don't know who invented it. Let me show you who invented this doctrine. Who came up with all this? Who pointed all this stuff out? Here's your man, Mark Biltz. Most people who believe in this blood moon stuff don't even know this man exists. They believe it because they heard it, from their friends, or they saw on Facebook something about there's going to be a blood moon, and so said, that may have something to do with Jesus, and so they accept it because of that. But they don't stop to think, well, where'd your friends get it from? Your friends got it from the media. Where'd the media get it from? This guy right here. This man actually wrote a book called Blood Moons, and in this book he breaks it down. He explains all in this book how he went to the NASA website, because NASA has this big website where they document all the different blood moons and solar eclipses. They have all this astronomical calendars. He went to NASA and he found all this blood moon stuff, and he matched these blood moons up to these Jewish feasts. And in his book he explains how he developed this doctrine. This is a quote, what he says. He said, "I saw on the internet an incredible total lunar eclipse, blood moon, over the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. I had read all the Bible verses in Isaiah, Joel, the Gospels, and Revelation, where the text talks about the moon turning to blood and the sun to sackcloth. Now notice here, I began to ponder the possibilities of tying these eclipses mentioned in the Bible to the possible coming of the Messiah." He tells you he invented the doctrine. He tells you that I was sitting at home on my laptop or whatever, my computer. I happened to see this blood moon over the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. I thought, wonder if I could take these blood moons and somehow or another link them to the verses in the Bible that talk about Jesus coming back. Now, he's the man who invented the doctrine, but he didn't really popularize it. He came up with it, but let me show you the man who actually popularized this teaching. John Hagee. I don't know if you've ever heard of him or not, but he's a very, very, very famous, popular teacher. He actually preaches at Cornerstone Church, located in San Antonio, Texas. That church he founded, and it has over 20,000 members. He's a mega church preacher. He's up there with the likes of Joel Osteen. He took Mark Biltz's doctrine of those blood moons and he popularized it. He put it on the market. He wrote a book himself called 4 Blood Moons. I got that book. Been through this joker. I watched this dude's videos. I've been all through this doctrine. And you're going to see it today. You're going to see what this doctrine really is about, and you're going to see, is it really biblical? I got the book. If you want to read this book, I'll let you read it. Because I'm convinced that if you read this book and you pay attention to the facts, there ain't no way you're going to believe this stuff. I'm not saying that to be rude or to be mean. I'm just telling you, you actually put this doctrine under scrutiny, it just don't hold up. It really doesn't. I want you to notice a quote from his book of what he believes these blood moons are about. And I want you to see how tricky he is. He doesn't want to come out and just flat out say, I believe these blood moons are pointing to the fact that Jesus is fixing to come back, but he alludes to it. Watch this. This is a long quote, I know, but it's interesting, very interesting to watch how he words stuff. This is what he says on page 244 of his book, where he explains what these blood moons are supposed to be about. He says, the coming of the 4 blood moons of 2014 and 2015, notice it, does not mean the rapture is going to happen during that time. Okay, remember that. He says these blood moons we're having, it does not mean the rapture is going to happen then. Okay, remember he said that. Keep reading. What they are telling, or why? Why does it not mean that? Because the rapture could happen at any moment. What they are telling us is that God is getting ready to change the course of human history once again. He is preparing to display the next series of signs in the heavens. What is going to happen? The question is not about the terminal generation or when Israel's enemies are going to attack next. The question is, are you ready to meet the Lord? Well, wait a minute. You just got through telling us it's not supposed to be having anything to do with the rapture, but then down here you're saying, you ready to meet the Lord? Keep reading. Are your children ready? Watch and pray. Be prepared like the 5 wise virgins who made sure they had extra oil for their lamps. The church is soon to leave the world. We are seeing signs of the end of this age. We're getting ready to leave here. The King is coming. He is coming soon. Now, I read this and I thought, wait a minute. Up here you say that it doesn't mean the rapture is going to happen. But then down here, you ready to meet the Lord? Then on down here, He's coming. Here's what He's doing. What he's doing is he doesn't want to come out and flat out say, I believe after these blood moons happen, Jesus is going to return. He doesn't want to make a statement like that and commit to it, because he knows if he does and Jesus doesn't return, then he's in a whole boatload of trouble. So here's what he does. He just says, well, could it be? You better get ready. Jesus could come. So see, he just puts it in the form of a question. Could it be? So that way he saves face if something doesn't happen. That way if Jesus doesn't return, he can say, well, I didn't say it was going to happen. I just asked the question. But y'all, his book is saturated with the concept of the rapture and Jesus returning. Chapter 6 of the book is entitled Concerning the Rapture. Chapter 8 of the book is called Wars and Rumors of Wars. Let me stop here and make a comment on that. Most people, when they read the verses in Matthew 24 that talk about wars and rumors of wars, they think Jesus is saying that's going to be signs that mark his return on final judgment. That's not what that means in the Bible. People think it's what it means, but it doesn't mean that. I'm going to show you that next week. But John Hagee thinks it does, and in this chapter he basically says it's marking the return of Jesus. Chapter 11 of the book is called The Second Coming. So he's basically getting the point across to you, I believe it's marking the second coming. He just doesn't want to commit to it. He just doesn't want to commit to it because he knows he can get himself in a lot of trouble. Now, let's do this. Let's take a closer look at this doctrine. I presented the doctrine to you. I showed you the people who came up with it and the person who popularized it. But let's take a closer look at it. Why do these blood moons land on Jewish feast days? And is that significant in any way? Okay, remember the three that they showed us. They showed us these three tetrads, and they said, look, history shows us that whenever you have 4 blood moons land on a Jewish feast day, something is going to happen to the Jews. It happened to the Jews every time on these 3 events. So 2014, 2015 blood moons landing on Jewish feast days means something's going to happen to the Jews. Well, I went to the NASA website, just like they did. That's where they get all this information from. They went to NASA's website. I went to NASA's website myself to see, is there any other tetrads of blood moons that land on Jewish feast days? Sure is. There's actually 4 other blood moons that landed on Jewish feast days. Guess what happened to the Jews during these 4 blood moons right here? These 4 series of blood moons right here. Guess what happened to them? According to their theory, something extravagant should happen. Guess what happened to them? Nothing, 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 and, drum roll please, nothing. Nothing. Well, wait a minute. They're telling us if you got 4 blood moons landing on Jewish feast day, something's got to happen. Why did nothing happen here? And guess how much he mentions about those 4 blood moons in his book? Guess how much he mentions about those? Not a peep. Not a word. Just completely throws those in the trash. Just completely ignore that and just focus on these 3. Well, look at it. Well, why can I not go to the blood moons we're having right here in 2014, 2015 and say, nothing's going to happen? They can look at these right here and say, well, look, every time there's a series of 4 blood moons landing on Jewish feast days, something happens, therefore something's going to happen here. Well, why can't I look at these and say, sometimes nothing happens? And say, well, therefore nothing's going to happen here. Why can't I do that? And now let's do this. Let's take a closer look at these 3 right here. I want you to see that these 3 are not nearly as significant as they want you to believe that they are. Let's take a closer look. They say that these 4 blood moons had prophetic significance. These did not. These right here, these 3 tetrads of blood moons did not have any kind of prophetic value to them. John Hagee believes they do. Page 224 of his book, he says they have prophetic significance. Let me show you they don't. Look at this tetrad right here, the tetrad of 1493 and 1494. They say that during these series of blood moons that happened in these 2 years, the Jews were kicked out of Spain. God was giving these blood moons to prophesy to the Jews, hey, look, Jews, something big is about to happen to y'all. Get ready. Well, guess what? I did some research on that. The Jews were actually expelled from Spain. Spain, the rulers of Spain, issued a decree called the Alhambra Decree in 1492, a year before those blood moons ever even happened. We didn't have that tetrad of blood moons until a year later. How is that prophetic? How is a sign given 1 year after an event takes place, how is that prophetic? That would be like me saying, or me watching Lynn eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and then an hour later at 1 o'clock I walk up to Lynn and say, Lynn, I'm making a prediction here that you will have eaten a peanut butter and jelly sandwich at 12 o'clock. Is that prophetic? You say, no, that ain't prophetic. Well, why? Oh, come on, that's close enough. It's just close enough. Would you say an hour is close enough? That ain't close enough. For it to be a prophetic sign, I've got to make it before the event happens. Now here's how John Hagee and all of them will respond to this. They'll say, well, okay, maybe it wasn't necessarily prophetic, but, it still happened right next to it. God was just marking it. He was just putting His mark on it. Okay, why didn't He put His mark, or why when He gave 4 other tetrads of blood moons, like I showed you earlier, why did nothing happen then? God gave a mark for nothing? Now, let me show you this as well. Look at this one. The tetrad of 1949, 1950, they say, those 4 blood moons were given to mark the fact that Israel was fixing to become its own independent nation. Well, again, Israel was declared its independence in 1948, a year before that. So again, how is an event that happens a year after, how is that prophetic? How's that prophetic? And here's another tidbit of information I found. Did you know this? Did you know that according to NASA, only 1 of those 4 blood moons were visible in Israel? The other 3 they really couldn't see. So think about it. God is saying to Israel, I want to give y'all a sign. I want to give y'all a sign for this independence that you've just gotten. I'm going to give you 4 blood moons, but you're only going to see 1 of them. Is that much of a sign from God to Israel if they only see 1 of His signs? Not very much. And then look at this one. The one happened here in 1967 and 1968. Israel again fought a 6-day war, and that's where they won Jerusalem back. Well, this tetrad of blood moons didn't occur until several months after the war ended. Again, how's that prophetic? This is what John Hagee says about this in his book. He says, this was a monumental prophetic event. And God lit up the heavens in celebration. God said, hey Jews, you just gained back Jerusalem. Let me celebrate by shooting off some fireworks. Let me celebrate by giving y'all some blood moons. Guess what? Guess how many of them blood moons the Israelites got to see? None. According to NASA, they saw absolutely none of them. I'm going to give y'all a sign to celebrate, but you're not going to see it. Well, thanks God. That sure is nice. And then notice this, the tetrad we're having here in 2014, 2015, guess how many of those blood moons the Israelites are going to see? 1. The only one they're going to be able to see is this last one that's coming up to 28. That's the only one they're going to be able to see. Now I thought, does he not know that? I'm thinking, when he wrote this book, is he not aware of the fact that Israel really couldn't see much of these blood moons? He never addresses it in his book. So what I did is I did some research on my own, and I found some of his videos. And I found a video where he addresses that issue. And here's how he addresses it. You can go on YouTube if you want to, and you can type in this, 4 Blood Moons Countdown. It was a special TV program that John Hagee had. On this program, John Hagee had a man on there named Hugh Ross. Now, Hugh Ross is an astronomer and an astrophysicist. He knows what he's talking about when he talks about moons and solar eclipses and stuff like that. Hugh Ross told this to John Hagee. He said, these blood moons are visible here in America, but not in Israel. Is there a reason why? This was John Hagee's response. I promise you, I'm quoting verbatim. John Hagee said, I don't have an answer for why Israel can't see it. And he left it at that. You say, well, I bet there was some more of the quote you're leaving out. Watch the video. He leaves it at that and shuts his mouth. I don't have an answer for it, and shuts his mouth. Here, I'll give you the timestamp. Find it on YouTube, 4 Blood Moons Countdown. Here's the timestamp, 18 minutes and 30 seconds in, of where this discussion takes place. I wanted to put the video up here so you could actually see it for yourself, but I'm lucky enough just to be getting the words up here. I'm not that computer illiterate yet to get the whole video, so I figured I would just give you the quotes and the timestamp so you can watch it for yourself. Now, I want you to ask yourself this question. Some people say, well, those blood moons, they still land on Jewish feast days. So that seems pretty significant to me. Why? Why do they land on Jewish feast days? Here's why. Real, baby, simple. They land on these Jewish feast days, y'all, because the Jewish calendar is based primarily on lunar cycles. Y'all, it's a calendar based upon the moon. And many of their feasts are purposefully intended to land on full moons, regardless of if those full moons are red or not. So these feasts are not landing on red full moons supernaturally because God says, hey, I'm going to give y'all a sign. They're landing on these red full moons because they're timed to do that. And if those those moons happen to be red or purple or green or whatever color, so what? That's why they land on those moons. And I also want you to notice this. Pay attention to this point because this one point alone breaks down this whole doctrine. Y'all, God ain't concerned about no Jewish feast day. God does not care about it. You know how I know that? Let's just read the New Testament. Colossians 2:14. Let's notice this scripture. Paul said that Jesus died on the cross and that when he died on the cross, he blotted out the bond written in ordinances that was against us, which was contrary to us. He's talking about the Jewish law, the law of Moses. That law was blotted out, taken out of the way when Christ died on the cross. He took it out of the way, nailing it to the cross. Now keep reading verse 16. Let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink or in respect of feast day or new moon or Sabbath day. You catching that? Paul's telling them, here's what's going on. Let me give you the context. The Christians in Colossae were coming under persecution because there were some people telling them, hey, look, you Christians of Colossae, y'all need to be following the law of Moses. Okay, you need to keep the Sabbath. You need to keep these feasts. Don't eat this. Don't drink that. Binding all these laws of Moses on them. And Paul says, don't let them people do that to y'all. Colossian brethren, do not let these people bind the law of Moses on you and get on to you for not keeping these feast days or these drinks and meats and Sabbath days. Don't let them get on to you for that. Why? Because God took that law out of the way. God don't care about no Jewish feast day. Look at this one. Galatians 4, verses 9 and 11. I'll give you this one out of the English Standard because it words it really good. English Standard Version, Galatians 4, 9 through 11. But now that you have come to know God, or rather to be known by God, how can you turn back again to the weak and the worthless elementary principles of the world, whose slaves you want to be once more? Now look at it. You observe days and months and seasons and years. He's talking about the holidays and the seasons, the months, the years of the Jewish people. Y'all are trying to keep these Jewish holidays. I'm afraid I may have labored over you in vain. Well, what's that telling me? That's telling me God doesn't care. God is not concerned with these things. God is not trying to send a message to us via blood moons landing on Jewish feast days because God is not concerned with those feast days. Plain and simple. Read the New Testament. You know, in his book, and all these other people who believe in this 4 blood moon stuff, they're always talking about, oh, God's concerned with the nation of Israel. Israel is still God's chosen people. That is a blasphemous lie. You're not going to tell me that people who flat out reject Jesus as their Savior, as their Messiah, you're not going to tell me that they're still saved, they're still God's people. People aren't reading the New Testament. Read Romans chapter 11. Romans chapter 11 will tell you that God cut off the Israelites for rejecting Jesus. Today, God's chosen people is us, the church. Galatians 6:16 says that Christians are the Israel of God today. We're God's chosen people, not those people living over there in Jerusalem. God's not concerned with that today. Now, I got a little bit more to show you. We're almost done. I know this is taking a while, but let me show you this. Another thing to point out, y'all, is that these tetrads of blood moons, they do not match these scriptures. They want you to think that they do because, you know, those verses say blood moons and these moons are red, so it matches. No, it don't. Because not only does the Bible say that these moons are going to be turned to blood, but the Bible also says the sun is going to be darkened. It says more than just moons being turned to blood. Now, in the book, Mr. Hagee recognizes that. So what he says is, well, guess what? There was a solar eclipse in March 20th of 2015. So it does fulfill those verses. I did some research. Was there a solar eclipse right then? Yeah, there was, but you probably missed it. Matter of fact, most of the world probably missed it, because the only way you ever could have saw this blood moon or this solar eclipse is if you were in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Look at this. This is a quote from timeanddate.com. They wrote an article called 10 Facts About the March 20th, 2015 Solar Eclipse. Now, timeanddate.com is a really good website to go to if you want to learn about astronomy and events that happen in time. This is what they said about that solar eclipse. Now, when the article was written, the solar eclipse was fixing to happen. So notice what the article says. It says, unfortunately, most of the grandness of this total solar eclipse will go unnoticed, because the path of totality falls right over the northern Atlantic Ocean between the coasts of Greenland and Norway. Only way you would have seen this solar eclipse is if you were right there in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean between Greenland and Norway. Other than that, nobody saw it. Question: how in the world is that a sign from God to the world, fulfilling biblical prophecy, if nobody even knew about it? Did y'all know about it? Nope. Well, God did a good job getting His message across then. Now, think about this. These texts also say that the stars are going to fall from heaven and the earth is going to quake. None of that happened during any of these tetrads. None of that. None of it. And those people who promote this doctrine ignore all that. Silent about why that didn't happen. Completely silent about it. And notice this, these texts do not mention anything about 4 blood moons happening in a row. Read it. Does it say that? No. It mentions the moon turning into blood, but it doesn't mention there's going to be 4 of them in a row. And it doesn't mention anything about them landing on Jewish feast days either. So they read these ideas into the text. Here's what they're doing. They ignore half of what the texts do say. They ignore the stars falling, the earthquake, and then they add ideas that the text doesn't even mention. 4 blood moons landing on Jewish feast days. If that's not taking away and adding to the Word of God, I don't know what is. Now, y'all, what I'm trying to do in this lesson is I'm just trying to get you to see the internal inconsistencies of this doctrine. I'm trying to get you to see that just if you examine the evidence they present, if you just look at it, it don't make sense and it don't add up. The majority of people who fall for this doctrine, they don't fall for it or believe it because, I've taken the time to study it, to look into it, to see if I really should believe it. No. They just believe it because it sounds good. Most people, I'm going to be honest with you, a lot of people are just superstitious. They really are. And so when a doctrine like this comes along, they jump on the bandwagon. Well, don't do that. Make sure that you take time whenever a doctrine like this is presented to you, that you study it out and look at it and make sure, is this something I really should be going along with? Now, that concludes this lesson. We're finally done. But next week what we're going to do is we're going to look at those verses in the Bible that actually mention the moon turning into blood. We're going to go through those texts and we're going to come to understand, what are these texts really saying? What is the point that they're getting across? But as always, if there's one here among us who is not a Christian, who would like to obey the gospel, we want to give you that opportunity. And if there's somebody here who has obeyed the gospel, but is strayed away and is not living faithful to the Lord, we also want to give you an opportunity to repent and to be restored. If there's anything we can do for you this afternoon, why don't you let it be known as together we stand and as we sing.